Welcome to Only Joe, where White House knockouts and very online politics somehow share a card. A UFC card at the White House had 85,000 people outside reacting to knockouts like a delayed sports echo. And somehow, that still might not be the weirdest part of this episode. The headline is insane on its face. The first UFC event at the White House, with roughly 3,000 people inside the octagon setup and around 85,000 outside. Because the crowd was split like that, knockouts landed with this weird delayed wave of noise, like the punch happened, then the building popped, then the lawn figured it out a beat later. All 7 fights ended by knockout, which is almost too perfect. If you're staging a combat sports spectacle at the White House, that's the most absurdly cinematic outcome available. People called it a once-in-a-lifetime moment for a sitting president and a historic first for the venue. And yeah, hard to argue with that, you do not get many presidential lawn fight nights. This also underlines how completely UFC has passed boxing in American cultural energy. Over the last 20 years, UFC built a better live product, more dynamic rules, stacked multi-fight cards, and a much broader bench of stars. You can feel the difference in the arena. UFC fans show up for the whole card. Boxing has had that long-running habit where half the building treats the undercard like optional homework and strolls in right before the main event. That tells you everything. One sport became an event. The other too often became a waiting room. The less fun part is fighter pay, because every time a big event happens, somebody hints at a massive payday and then the numbers vanish into smoke. You'll hear a name like Justin Gaethje attached to some supposedly life-changing bag, but the contracts stay opaque, the agents stay vague, and the UFC doesn't exactly rush in with receipts. Insiders say elite fighters can make tens of millions over a career, and that may be true for the top slice, but most fighters still don't seem to have reliable retirement security. So the sport looks rich, the stars look rich, and the structure underneath still leaves people asking whether the athletes are actually getting a fair long-term deal. On election rules, the argument getting pushed hard is a federal voter ID law, framed as a way to close what supporters call the biggest mail-in voting loophole. Backers say there may even be bipartisan Senate support, but the 60-vote filibuster threshold is where the idea goes to die. The politics here are touchy because critics call voter ID laws racially discriminatory, while polling cited by supporters says Black and Hispanic voters back ID requirements at rates similar to white voters. Then you add stories like that California primary where mail-in ballots reportedly broke heavily for a third-place candidate over the frontrunner, and suddenly the ballot handling debate gets a lot hotter. Whatever side you're on, this is one of those issues where public trust is the whole game, and everybody keeps talking like trust is optional. Then there's the Iran piece, which sounds like a political thriller nobody would greenlight because it feels too on the nose. The allegation is that a well-funded disinformation campaign, reportedly backed by elements of the Israeli government, pushed the idea that a US-Iran memorandum was basically a $300 billion giveaway. The point, according to that account, was to kill the deal before it could breathe. At the same time, the administration approach is described as carrots for Iranian pragmatists and calibrated military responses when hardliners start trouble, especially around the Strait of Hormuz. So you get diplomacy, brinkmanship, and information warfare all stacked on top of each other, which is pretty much modern foreign policy in one messy bundle. A different trust problem shows up in the Biden health discussion. Joe Biden had 2 intracranial aneurysm surgeries back in 1988, which is a major medical fact, and the complaint here is that it rarely gets serious mainstream attention. The broader argument is that high-profile politicians' health histories keep getting softened, filtered, or treated like sensitive family gossip instead of relevant public information. And when people later feel like they were managed instead of informed, they don't just get mad at one politician, they get suspicious of the entire system. The youth socialism story is less mysterious than people pretend. If you're younger and home ownership feels fake, stable jobs feel shaky, and the economy looks like a game where somebody else already took all the good squares, of course radical alternatives start sounding less radical. Commentators tie that mood to offshoring, low-wage immigration, and years of wage stagnation. The common thread is the feeling that upward mobility stopped being a normal expectation. If there isn't a believable path back to a middle-class life, people are going to shop for a different system. That should not shock anybody. That rolls right into labor and AI, because this is where the next political explosion could come from. Current labour law keeps unions confined to a pretty narrow lane, and the reform idea here is to modernise toward more cooperative models that can bargain over wages, training, and benefits in a real way. The fear is simple. AI could create enormous wealth and funnel way too much of it into a tiny tech elite. If that happens while ordinary workers get less leverage, less security, and more lectures about innovation, the backlash is going to be fierce and extremely predictable. The proposed answer is more worker participation, updated union structures, and antitrust enforcement before a few AI giants become untouchable. A couple of stories sit in that permanent American zone where secrecy breeds obsession. With Epstein, the scale of the network and the reported links to US and Israeli intelligence keep feeding claims that there was much deeper influence across politics and science than the public has been allowed to see. The Justice Department put out about 6 million documents, but with heavy redactions, which is basically the fastest route to keeping every theory alive forever. The UFO fight has the same structure. Hal Puthoff testified that a 1990s interagency task force reviewed alleged crash retrieval evidence and concluded disclosure would do more harm than good, so the whole thing was effectively shelved. Recent declassified videos have brought the transparency demands roaring back, while skeptics keep making the obvious point that truly definitive extraterrestrial hardware would be very hard to hide forever. And then, because our politics can never resist one more stupid accelerant, a post-fight joke saying Michelle Obama is a man detonated into a full media firestorm. The reaction was framed as attention economy theatre, with one side calling it obvious overreaction and the other treating it like a major moral emergency. At this point, a bad joke, plus cable news, plus social media, is practically its own renewable energy source. One last culture war brick through the window, Texas arguing over displaying the 10 Commandments in classrooms. Opponents say that's government endorsement of Christianity. Supporters say it's teaching cultural heritage. And the legal backdrop stays muddy because Supreme Court precedent has bounced between protecting voluntary religious expression and blocking state-sanctioned religious displays. So this one is headed for the familiar American endgame: endless moral certainty, messy law, and absolutely nobody conceding an inch. That's it for Only Joe. If your week included White House knockouts, AI labor panic, UFO secrecy, and classroom commandments, you are officially caught up. Talk soon. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.